Uh, we just got back to Gray's house after having a good barbecue lunch here at Dallas, and we just wanted to make a little bit of a record here about all my brothers' military records and so forth, just for people down the line that might be interested in it. We're going to start off here with Gray, and then we'll get with Walt a little bit after Gray finishes. So Gray, if you want to tell us a little bit about when you went in and so forth, and
Okay.
where you trained and all that, just go ahead.
I'll first give you my age so you can kind of know how I fit in with the rest of them as we go along. I'll be 81 years old in August the 10th. So
You were born
that
in...
puts me as a kind of a war baby. I was born in 1917, and Mother died in, I believe it was 1919. So I was just a baby when she died. But getting back to the war part of it, I jotted down some things on a sheet of paper here that I can refer to kind of keep in order of the time they came. And I can tell you that I was down in Reedsville, Georgia, and I heard about the, of course, the war was being promoted then, and I knew I was going to have to go one way or the other. And I decided that if I got into aviation cadet training, I'd have a better chance than just be drafted into the trenches. And so I went down to Waycross, Georgia, and stood this test for it, and I passed it. And it was a pretty hard test too. A lot of, about, I'd say 20% of them passed, and the others were sent somewhere else to go. But anyway, I had to wait after I passed. They inducted me then and swore me in as being in the Army back in July of 1942. And then along about December, they called me up, and I had to report for duty. And by that time, I had already resigned from my work there with the Farmers Home Administration in Reedsville, and had moved back to Dallas, getting in preparation for leaving. And the operator of the station over here at the railroad helped me get set up to leave and so forth in December. I can't remember the date of it. But he made the reservations and stopped the train like they always did in those old days, you know. And I got on that thing with a little suitcase and headed out to, the first stop I made was out in New Orleans. And I thought it would be no problem, you know, to go to some hotel there and get a room. But I wound up toting that little suitcase around for at least an hour, and officers go in and get rooms, and I was a little buck private, you know. I walked till I'd just about given out, and I found this old flop house, and she says, "Yeah, we got a room." And I went up, and the bed was torn, and there's holes in the wall and everything. So,
kind of a ratty place.
Yeah, and I bought me a newspaper and put down there, and then another one to cover up with, and that's how my first night.
That was your first Army experience.
So it was kind of rough to get started out, and I didn't know that Mr. Marchman, the man that stopped the train for me, had made reservations for night's lodging on the train, you know. And I sat up.
Oh my God.
Didn't know I had a reservation in the Pullman. That's just a little old green boy just out of the country, you know.
I've been down that road.
But anyway, after I left New Orleans, didn't stay there but just overnight. I had to change trains, but they had just gobs of people doing the same thing I was, headed for this training area out there in California where I was going. They sent me first to Santa Ana, California. And at Santa Ana, we went through very rigorous physical exams and everything so they could determine what I would be best suited for in aviation cadet training. And it wound up I was going to be trained as a pilot. Some would be trained as navigators, and some as well, whatever these
Bombardiers.
tests, yeah, bombardiers, whatever that determined you'd be best suited for. And some were so nervous they just couldn't do some of that work. And they would find that out in the tests that they'd give you, you know. For instance, had some little thing, I'd hold a stick in a little hole, and it was, every time you'd touch the edges of the little hole with that stick, it'd make a racket, you know. They said, now don't let that thing make a racket. And they'd be yelling at you, you know. And anyway, I'd just sit there, and it didn't bother me that they'd yell at me, but some of them would just tear them all to pieces. And they'd know that they wouldn't be set for pilot of a plane, you know. And so they'd give them something else. But that's the type of training, the type of
Exam.
test that they gave us there. And then after we got that, we were assigned quarters that we began to,
That's Santa Ana.
yeah, Santa Ana. And Arlene decided she would come, that's my wife, Arlene, decided she would come out and stay. And the day that she was supposed to come, I felt I was playing soccer during an athletic period there, training. You know, we had to have everything balanced out there. You had to go through so many hours of classwork and so much physical stuff. And anyway, I fell and hurt my back, and I couldn't even straighten up hardly. But anyway, I talked the commanding officer to let me go and see her and stay the weekend off, you know. And I bent over trying to go down there, and I just says, I'm not going to let her see me like this. And suddenly I could straighten up. And I know it was adrenaline that got into my system, because I was walking as straight as an arrow. And I did the whole weekend until just about time to go back to the quarters. And when I got back, they really kidded me. They says, you sure did get in bad shape while you gone. But anyway, that was at Santa Ana. And the next place I went is called primary training.
Greg, excuse me just a minute. About Santa Ana. A bunch of our pilots trained there too. After you had already gone in, but I heard some of the pilots talk about it later. Said we got our training, some of it at Santa Ana, and they were fighter pilots rather than bomber pilots, so they sorted them out in there, just like you were talking about.
I was in a class called 43H. That was the class I went through, and later on I was hurt and had to drop back a class. Made me in a class J that when I got my wings, I was in class J, but I'll tell you more about that later. But my first seeing a plane and so forth, after I left Santa Ana, I went up to Larry, California, and there I trained in a Stearman. It's a single engine little plane, and I had a instructor in the front seat, and he had a stick, and I had a stick in the back seat that you fly with, you know, like the plane did. This day they have controls and like an automobile, I think, but back then that was all the way we knew to fly in those little planes, you know, was that stick.
Stick and the rudder, pedals.
Yeah. Anyway, I think I flew with the man to train me for a day or two, and then by that time he thought I was ready to go by myself, and so I flew my solo flight there. From then on I was all right in training. But I would like to tell you one thing about my training there at Tulare. It was in the spring when I was there, and up about 1,000 feet, there was the most pleasant smell I ever smelled in my life, and it was those thousands of acres of oranges, trees in full bloom down below there. And I'll never forget that odor as long as I live. We'd be flying up there, and you'd think you was in heaven almost.
That scent would rise.
Yeah, scent would rise up and be up at 1,000 feet. And I had never known that happen, but that's where I learned that. And Eileen followed me on up there, and it was hard to get quarters for her, but she found a place the man at a motel told her that if she would clean the rooms up, so forth, he would give her a place to stay. And that's how she got quarters at Tulare. And so she would clean the quarters and she stayed there. And then we didn't have too much entertainment around there, but she got in with a Crockett family that he came from Nashville, Tennessee. And his wife brought a little old car that was open, you know. She had a baby with her, and she brought a little black gal that looked after the baby for her, you know, like some of them did back, always had help, you know. And but she had that when they were at Santa Ana too, and they stayed down there on Laguna Beach while I was training up at Santa Ana. And I'd go there on the weekends, and we could hear those old seals down on the beach and so forth. But this black gal I'm talking about liked that country so good out there. When it came time for us to leave, she stayed right on there in that area and wouldn't go any further more. She just made that her change of life right there. She never had, because out there they treated blacks, you know, just exactly like they did white people, and she had never experienced that before. Getting back to Larry, and as I say, I didn't have a whole lot of money, and so Aline was cleaning up a hotel room, and I made $75 a month when we went in, and that it just about took that to keep her in gasoline and so forth.
How long had y'all been married at that time?
About a year, I guess. No, more than that too. I'd say.
You married in 40.
I married in 42 years is how long I've been married. But she decided she wanted to come out there and live, and nearly all of them that had wives let them come out there and make quarters the best they could. And I know when we were, the next place I'm going to tell you about, it's called Basic Training. Had a little single engine. It was much stronger engine than the Stearman that I flew, and it was equipped to have instrument training, and also the old mean instructor I had was meaner to us than my first one. And I'll tell you a little about what happened on one of my instrument training flights. We had that same stick I was telling you about, and he'd sit in front and try to instruct us on instrument training. And sometimes a little something go wrong, he'd just hit that stick just as hard as he could hit, and he'd keep my legs just with bruises all over each side of him where he'd hit it.
My goodness.
And so he had 5 other kids there that were taking the same training as I was, and one of them was a good artist, and I still have a picture that he drew. He had his baseball catcher's mitt on and all that other gear, and says, "Reporting for training, Mr. Hackball." So I knew he'd been doing him the same way he had me. Let me see what else we did at Lancaster. Aline went from Lancaster down to Hollywood, stayed right off of Hollywood and Vine, and got a job in a used car place. And she found a car there she bought for $25.
Wow.
And it's a little old sedan Ford, old model, you know, of course. And she used that to get around in, and it's pretty good. But she did get a $5 ticket for driving on the inside lane out there. They were very strict with the driving even then out there. And that $5 was hard to get up about that time.
It was a big ticket back in them days.
And about the middle of the summer, I finished my basic training there and was sent to Yuma, Arizona. And Yuma is a town that, if you don't know where it is, it's in the middle of a desert. And it was 120 degrees when we hit there. And this friend of ours, Coy Cooper from Alabama, and he had a car, and we drove in his car down to Yuma, went through that Death Valley. It's below sea level going down to Indio, I believe, through there, and we didn't get to Yuma the first day, but we got out to El Centro, which is about 30 miles this side of Yuma, and the day we got there, it was getting late in the afternoon, and we started hunting a place for this boy and his wife, and me and Eileen to spend the night. And every time we'd get on the sidewalk, start going down, it'd be solid crickets going down. It was cricket year. I guess they were just worse that year. But you couldn't even see the sidewalk for crickets. Everywhere you'd put your foot and start to put it down, they'd make a path for you by flying away, jumping away.
They didn't
But
jump on you?
that's how, well, they didn't jump on me, but they'd just get out of your way. And everybody there just
You
kept,
sure there are crickets in place of frogs?
no, that's crickets.
Crickets, okay.
Just millions and
I've
billions.
seen frogs that way down at Denman one
And,
time. After a rain, the ground was just simply covered with frogs.
Well, this is worse than that. I just couldn't believe that many frogs. But El Centro was an area there that it was a real good farming valley, right this side of the desert, where we had to go across a 30-mile desert there to get to Yuma from El Centro. But it was a lush farming country right there. And she got her job in an office there that government, like she had done here in Dallas before she left, you know, with the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. She knew all about that, so she got a job there while she was there, temporary job. And that's how she lived while she was there. But tell you a little about Yuma. We had, as I say, a whole lot of heat. And these little old rooms that we stayed in there, to keep us cool, they'd put a fan on the outside and then put Excelsior, just chopped up wood, you know, in between two wires and keep water dripping on it. And this fan blowing through there would cool your room off in each little room. And I had a roommate from Massachusetts. I can't remember the town right offhand, but his father was a general. And I thought he'd get extra treatment, but he didn't really, except one time he forgot to, when he was landing, forgot to put his wheels down, and he landed on the runway without his wheels down, but he didn't have any trouble from that. They let him keep right on flying, but I was the best man at his wedding while I was out there. I'd see Joe DiMaggio every day, nearly when we'd go out. Everything was in marching in order and everything else, and we'd march right by where Joe's quarters was, and he'd be outside working on his old Cadillac, you know, with the hood up. And I saw him dozens of times out there, and that's all I ever saw him doing, was working on his car.
Is that right?
Yeah. And let me see what else I did out there. I got my second lieutenant bars while I was there, that officer's bars. And we were, as I say, were learning how to fly twin engine planes there, where I had basic. This Yuma was advanced training. And you had to learn how to fly twin engine, which is a little change from flying a single engine plane, and had different controls and so forth. But you get on to it pretty good. And then after I left Yuma, I came back to Columbia Army Air Base. And that was a staging area for planes that were going to be sent overseas, and with the crew that you'd probably be using. In other words, they brought in me a radio operator, tail gunner, and all my crew would be there training, and we'd train just like we were on missions. One mission I went out from Columbia to Birmingham. Well, it's a direct line right over our house, Daddy's house, And so I was coming back, I said, I'm gonna make a pass around there, and I buzzed down pretty low, and I could see chicken just running all over the backyard. And Jim Miller says, I saw you come by. He's talking about, he was down
Well, they
there.
didn't want y'all to do that though, did they?
No,
They didn't want you to get
no.
out of line.
You're
No.
not the one that made that picture, that aerial picture of the house, are you?
No. But anyway, Jim made out like he knew I flew over. He says, I was there in the pond down there that day when you came by and circled it. But I remember how small the area seemed after I came over my B-25. That's what I was practicing in then. And made a circle, and on my ring of making it, Fayetteville, it went all the way up to Fayetteville to make a circle. So that's how long you got to have about 5
Radius
miles.
was that far, wasn't it?
Yeah. And when I made my complete sweep, that's when I came down low and went on. Then I went on back to the air base over at Columbia from there. But I thought that was interesting that I'd see my house from the air on that.
And recognize it.
Yeah.
I remember you telling one time about your navigator not knowing where you were and you saw Stone Mountain. They recognized.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's, you know, coming from our house on back towards Columbia, you can see Stone Mountain off to the left there, you know. And you know where you are then.
Yeah.
But I knew where I was too. But, that one time I did have trouble with my navigator though.
That's when you were going overseas, wasn't it?
Yeah. After I left Columbia, well, I'll tell you a little bit about Columbia first. Eileen lived in the town of Casey, South Carolina, which is just a few miles out from the air base.
It's a suburb.
Yeah. And she had a little hot upstairs apartment, and we put fans in it and cooled the best we could, but that's hot up there in the summertime.
Oh, Lord, yeah, that's the hottest place in the world on the
Yeah.
Congaree River.
Mhm.
Columbia is, and Casey's been in between Columbia and the river there.
And that's when I first began to train in a plane that some nut had gotten and put a 20mm gun that came right down to they left the co-pilot out, and the gun went by his seat right on out to the front of the plane. And then the not the radio operator, the engineer was in charge of putting shells in it, and the shells, that's one of the shells right there that went in that gun. You can see it.
Goodness.
But anyway, it's,
That's a 30, what is that?
Take the
What
broom
millimeter
out.
is that?
Take the broom
I
out.
made a broom out of it, but anyway, it had a little old shell that big, right there. And I trained in that
That's
thing.
about a 75mm.
No, that's a 20.
No, that ain't a 20. 20 is about that big around.
Well, a 90 was one of those old big
Yeah, I
ones.
know it.
This is 75.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're right.
That's an old armor.
That's
you
what
got
I-
there.
I've studied
Yeah,
that stuff.
Walt knows, cause
I've studied
he was in the
ammunition.
ordnance, that's right. You
Yeah,
knew.
I was in the ordnance. I knew all the
But
shit.
anyway, when he got ready for me when he had his shell in there, and we'd go down to Myrtle Beach there, they had a big old sheet about the side of the fireplace there, they'd sit out, and we'd fire at that coming in, and he'd put the shells in it, and then he'd tap me on the shoulder. Now this how antiquated it was. And when he got the shell in, he'd tap me on the shoulder, and then I had a little trigger on the pedestal there that I would fire into that and hit that sheet with that little thing there. That's how you learn to shoot them.
Come a long ways there.
And so, I thought that's the most antiquated thing I ever heard of, when you could take a 500-pound bomb and do the same thing and blow the whole ship up. And so, when I got overseas there and began to use that, I said, this is crazy. And all of us said the same thing, and they quit making them right then. And
They put a cluster of 50 calibers in the nose, didn't they?
yeah,
In
We
place
had
of putting that one
14,
big
50.
gun there.
we had 14 50 calibers on the plane, and I could sit there at the control and mash 1 second of it and have thousands of rounds of ammunition with one trace every 6
Yeah,
shots.
6
Looked
shit,
like
that's
fire
right.
going out, you know. And that's how I learned, though, about flying low and learning how to drop bombs low.
You could tell the way your tracer were running, you know, whether your bullets were going in the right direction
Yeah.
too. That, like he says, about every sixth one would be a red light, you know, you could see where it's going that
Yeah,
way.
you could sit there and see
And the rest
right
of them,
what
maybe
you was
one of
hitting.
them would be armor piercing, one would be incendiary.
That's right.
And different ones in the same,
Same,
Belt,
on the same
you know.
belt, yeah.
but go ahead, excuse me, Gray.
Anyway, I left that with that type of training anyway, and went on out to Fairfield Susan Airport, which is in the edge of San Francisco, and I had to wait a long time. They had to put a Bombay tank in those 25s because they weren't equipped to fly the distance from San Francisco to Hawaii. And so they'd put that Bombay tank in there, and then that'd give us enough gas to get over there. But you didn't have a lot to play with even then. So what I was going to tell you about my navigator a while ago, he gave me a course. I had already studied the course I was going to fly before we left, and I knew that we'd have winds blowing us this way and that. And I looked down as we left, and there was about a 25 to 30 mile an hour wind. I could look at the white caps and tell that, and I could see which way it was blowing us. And I told him to give me a correction, and he gave me a correction to go in the opposite direction from what I thought he ought to. And we got out about halfway, and I was supposed to be in contact with a lumber ship out there that nobody owned. It just floated, but it had a radio signal that gave off, and it would give, if you were up to 75 miles away from it, you could pick it up. Well, I couldn't pick that up. And so I just immediately knew that we'd been drifting like he had given me the wrong correction. So I just told him to go back in the rear, and I changed course about 20 degrees right there. That's a pretty good change way out in the middle of the ocean. But I looked down and saw about how many miles you'd be blowing off if it's a 30 miles an hour wind and you've been flying, say, 4 hours. You're 120 miles off course, and that's what I was correcting for. But anyway, we made it on into Hawaii, in Hickam Field at Hawaii. And that was, I felt like I was lucky to get there because we could have wound up in the Kurile Islands, you know, and up in Alaska, so up in
Out
there.
in the break somewhere out
Well,
of
yeah,
gas.
that's
Get out of gas and landed in the
That's
Pacific.
what I would done because we didn't have a whole lot of gas to fool with.
Yeah.
But as I say, I felt lucky to get there that day. And
Great, just a minute. I'm gonna cut off just a second.
I on the way to Honolulu, and I was telling you about changing direction. Well, anyway, I came on into Hickam Field, which is the main airfield on Oahu Island, which is the biggest island there. Honolulu is on that same island. And as I flew into it, I looked down on the map I was looking at in my plane, and I saw leprosy colony. So I flew right over a leprosy colony and going into Hawaii. And I don't imagine that's there anymore, but back in those days, I think I was the only one that treated leprosy here. And I didn't realize it. I'd be flying right over there.
I've seen something on television about that leprosy colony there.
But when I got to Hickam Field, I think as well as I remember, stayed a couple of days there. And then from there on, I made jumps from one island to another, all the way to Australia. I stopped at Christmas Island the first night out.
Bub was at Christmas Island one time.
Was he? Well, it was just a day's flight, you know, and have plenty of time to rest and then gas up and check your plane. And then little Christmas Island was only 40 miles all the way across the end of it. And there's a coconuts on the whole island. It's some company owned it. I guess it grew coconut. But they made an airstrip there. And that was what I saw of Christmas Island. And then the second was Canton Island, and it was, I'd say, a couple of miles. There's nothing but airstrip on the, in the middle of the ocean's what it amounted to, with a gas tank on it. And we stayed there one night. And then the Fiji Islands, I particularly remember lots of things about the Fiji Islands because the blacks there said certain things about the boys that had been there, you know, I knew the Americans had been there from what they said. But they'd be what we went to officers' quarters there and they had a good meal, and the blacks were all barefooted. They were waiting on us, and when they'd walk, the whites, every one of them, they had white bottoms of the feet and the hands were white, and I'd never seen that before. So after all those years since then, when I see them black with that kind of hands, I know they're from the Fiji Islands, because that's the only place I ever saw them like that. But then I went to New Zealand. From there, Tontuta, New Zealand. And I remember about Tontuta, I was standing around after I landed, and right ahead of me is about 5 miles out, there's a mountain, and you got to turn one way or the other right quick and taking off to get out from there. But as I say, I was standing around there, and this boy that carried mail to other islands in New Zealand's islands, he says, "You want to ride with me down to so-and-so?" I said, "Yeah," and I hopped in this plane that he delivered the mail in, and we went down. It wasn't over a 20 or 30-minute ride down there. And when we got back, on the way back, I was looking down at the water, and I saw a bunch of fish in there. Most of them, I'd say, were about the size of an automobile, that size, you know, not huge like a big whale, but a pretty good size too. And then I saw this fish. It looked like a boxcar. I mean, it's the biggest fish I ever saw. I mean, it has to be a whale, you know. But I've never seen or heard of anything that big in my life that could be in the ocean. And I just...
that water was just clear as a crystal.
Yeah, you could look right down in flying along that ocean, you know, that beach there. And this group of fish was near the beach there and just swimming around. And I saw that huge thing. He was brown, and the rest of the ones around him were kind of a gray. And I don't know why he'd be, except for his age, maybe. He must have been a huge creature, because I didn't know they grew that big. Now, let's see, from New Zealand, we went on in and flew across those coral, where the good fishing is in Australia. You know, you always hear about that coral reef out this side of Australia. Well, I flew right across that on into Townsville. That's Townsville, I was trying to remember the other day. Townsville, Australia. And I was stationed there for, I guess it's 2 weeks before we finally started back out from there, going north. I guess it's north as well as I remember. In other words, across the Coral Sea, back the way our troops did, to catch up with the main fighting area. And my first stop was at Nadzab, New Guinea, and we were stationed there for just a short while. Nadzab was nothing but woods, but anyway, they wouldn't let me fly first pilot until I had some experience in how the guns would sound when they all go off at once and so forth. And so I flew one mission there. That was my first mission, and I got used to kind of how it would be to go on a mission. It really what it amounted to. But then from Nadzab, I went up to Martai Island, and that's where a lot of my missions started going. I didn't fly low level as much as medium, and then we, as well as I remember, flew one to ass trip over in the Celebes Islands, and some of the planes had they had set rocks all at the end of the runway that we were bombing the ships along the runway there, you know. And they blew up the rocks into us as we were going across that, and some of them just had concave places on the wings where they hit those rocks. And
these are stories I never hear on TV.
But I had a good time on Martai Island. We were right on the water, and we had a spring that had the prettiest water in it, just about as big as this room. We got waterfowl whole camp out of it, and we just put a little what's that stuff?
Lister-bag.
Chlorox in it, chlorine in it, and the list, we got it in a Lister bag, and some of them, we didn't have at that time, didn't have a Jeep, but they finally stole enough to make us up a Jeep. Then some of them would get tires off of some other company's Jeeps, and then first thing you know, they had five little old company there. You know, we got us a Jeep that we could haul lister bags in, kept water there for us, and we had to go swimming down there right on the water, and it's pretty water, you know, and clean. It's just a pretty island there to be on, and you could look outside your cabin and see these birds that had looked like green with the beautiful coloring on them, you know, just float wild out there where we keep them here in cages, you know. But that's where they come from, out in those islands like that. And one day, two more boys and I were out there with our pistols, found this big old pile of dirt been pushed up by some tractor, you know. We said, well, we believe we'd practice a little bit with our guns, and we carried our gun in the holster all the time. So we were out there firing away, and this fella came up in a little old Jeep. He says, whoever the commander was, Provost Marshal, wants to see y'all. So we went back. He was in bed about half asleep. He was mad as hornet because we'd woke him up shooting our gun.
Oh.
He fussed us out about that. But anyway, that's some of the trouble you get into.
Yeah, tell them about the trouble you got on the end of the runway. One time you told me about this.
Okay.
You're gonna run your engine up down there. All of them do that. Every one of them, all the pilots I ever saw, and I guess that's a regulation.
Yeah.
Where you go down, taxi down to the end of the runway, getting ready to take off. Well, they'll run the engine up so many thousand revolutions, see everything running all right. You know about all that.
Well,
then
I'd already passed
that.
I missed that. I told you, you know, they wouldn't let it fly by myself in the first mission.
Yeah.
Well, the next one, they put me in with this boy, and I was flying co-pilot, and he was flying pilot. We were going to exchange that way. And then the next day we swapped. Well, he lucky enough that he was the one that's doing the running his motors up that way. But anyway, there was a little craft that the general had of the island right there at the end, and when he ran them up full force, I saw the guy out there doing all this. I didn't know what he's doing. But anyway, got back down. They met us out there and said the general wanted to see us, and so we went there, and he says, as long as y'all under my command, says you're not going to be have promotion. In other words, he says that's the second time some fool has come along and tore my Beechcraft wing.
They just got to run the motor up so hard it'll just blow one of them little planes just rolling over. You know?
So I could just see my promotions going down the drain. But I didn't stay there. Yeah, I didn't stay on Mauritania too long. It got out from under his command there. We would send planes from this same general, send planes down to Australia for different things to get motors fixed and all. And we'd give the pilot of the plane, say $50 or $100 a piece to bring us chicken, steak, and eggs, stuff. Just didn't even know what it was hardly up where we were there. And the general found out about it, and he told this same guy to stop it and put it in his larder. And we'd paid for it ourselves, and yet he took all that stuff.
Oh.
Yeah.
And I felt like
I bet he ate it too.
I felt like he ought to have been fired. It was a general.
Yeah.
If they could fire
They could
him.
get away with stuff.
But that's the way they were.
Yeah.
And he got all our good old food, and there we were eating out of
That's
can
not
rations.
right.
Yeah.
And they didn't know how to cook that at Mauritania either. I remember that. They'd take a tin of those old diced potatoes, pour it in solid grease, and warm it up, and that's how we dipped it out, in
Oh, wow.
grease.
Don't forget to tell about that group of people with the landing.
That's on up further.
Okay, well you.
From there, I'll tell you about that right now. Mary Neal was talking about when I got on up after I left Mauritania, went up to Lingayen Gulf in the Philippines, and I remember one scene that comes to my mind is when we got to what's the biggest city in Philippines there? Manila. They would, right at that time, had a big fight going on right in Manila, and we were flying, we could see just miles and miles of our troops coming along. We were flying along that road, and I got up almost to where the fighting was the worst, and I saw this truck loaded with bodies. And I said, golly, they're killing everybody there. Just,
Yeah,
that's the way it
yeah.
looked to me. But they were throwing them on a truck and hauling them out. And that's just one of the pictures that I had in my mind of what's happening. And some of them just, I could see them look up. I was flying low level. We were all in the group moving up north, you know. But we went on up from there to Lingay and Guff, which is up, I guess, 100 miles up the coast. And set up shop there, and that's what they do for runways at those places when we'd stop. They'd put steel mats down for a mile, whatever it took for the runway, you know, those old hard steel mats.
Yeah. I've
And
seen
that
those.
would be our runway. And
Those things wouldn't hold up too good, though,
Not too
because they
good.
had them in Casablanca where we were, and when they'd land, especially if they brought a bomb back in, they kept those old mats,
tear it all to pieces.
turn them all to pieces, and the planes looked like they just tear the running gear off when they hit them, just rough.
I was gonna tell you, one time, up we were at this, Lingay and Guff, one of my buddies that flew mission with me one day, he was hit. I looked across and I saw a parafrag bomb. If y'all know what it is, it's a very small bomb, but you drop them on runways and they
Got a
explode.
parachute on them.
It's got a little old parachute, that's parafrags, what they call them. And they burst into small pieces and hit the planes on the runway and everything they can hit. It's a lot of shells going on is what it amounts to. But I looked across and I saw the parafrag hanging to the bottom of my buddy's plane. And I said, golly, I'd hate to be in that shape. And I looked again and it's gone. And there was a concave place out of the bottom of his plane where it had blown up.
Oh,
And I believe it was the radio operator had dropped out when it blew up. And, that was the only one that was killed on the plane. And I flew alongside him and it slowed him down so I couldn't hardly slow my plane enough to keep in there, yet he was running full speed and trying to hold up. So they called on the radio and they said, well, set a course of, I can't remember all this stuff, a certain amount, and says in 20 minutes out in the ocean there, says a submarine will come up in front of you at that time. Now they had that pinned down to that detail, you know, and so we started flying this, and the rest of them went on back to that had flown on this ship, on this trip, you know. They went on back, but I stayed with him. And we got there, and this submarine right up there on time. But he said, I'm not going. He says, I'm going to get on back. So he got back to this mat we were talking about, you know, at our place there, and he had to land on it. When he hit it, just tore the mat all to pieces, you know, where that bottom was. It's not like an ordinary landing there. You'd slide. He just hit some of that mat, but it didn't catch on fire, and he rolled on back, and he was all right. But he didn't want to fly for a month after that. They had to tell him every day, you got to fly, you can't go home. And so he finally took another mission. But
yeah, it sounds like a movie almost, you know, what you're saying.
yeah, well that
Scary
happened.
movie.
That happened. And his name was Walt, but he lived out in California. But
And he just wasn't gonna put that thing down in the
No,
water.
No, he wasn't gonna in that water.
He didn't. And,
Let me ask you one thing. When you were flying, and you said you at the islands were just like runways out there in the ocean where you got gas. Were the people out there to put
wasn't
the
anybody
gas?
on the island but
You
us.
just had to do your own gassing up. I
Well,
mean,
they had somebody. I mean, they
Oh.
had the people.
They had a
in charge.
person there that would
Yeah.
fill up the plane.
But it wasn't.
well, they didn't have to, but they just
No,
had
they
somebody
didn't
there
have
to work.
people on the island
Yeah.
living. Not on those two I mentioned. And I remember one other thing too. I'll tell you about. We were coming. This is another place where we were on a runway and bombing runways, and this ship was hit, and we got out to the edge of the ocean there, and there's a big bay out in there. I'd say it's 20 miles all the way across from one side to the other, but anyway, he had to land in that bay. And I circled around him, and I could see people coming off ashore in boats. And then at the same time, we had what we call a PBY. That's a flying boat that can land.
PBY. PBY.
Yeah,
Patrol
PBY.
Crab.
Yeah, he came up and got those people when the ship landed. He was somewhere near before these boats could get to
Get
him.
out from the shore.
Yeah,
How about that?
so that was a race in time right there. But then I left. I guess he's all right. I hope so. The whole crew, but I don't know how many they could carry, but I didn't ever know about that. And then
How much was your crew on a B-25?
Well,
5 men? You had how many gunners? 6 men?
6, yeah, altogether, but pilot, co-pilot, engineer, that's 3, radio operators 4, and then a top turret gunner and a tail gunner.
Yeah, oh yeah.
6.
6,
That's medium bomb.
yeah. And before they put all those machine guns in the nose, they did have in the early ones a gunner in the nose of it. But after they did that, then I fired all but what the radio operator was firing. I'm not the engineer, top turret gunner, I believe something they put in that little old seat right above right behind my head that he sat in up there, and it revolved around so he could shoot all the way around if there's anything coming from above.
I remember you saying that you had a little antenna on the bottom of your plane that you flew so low that it knocked it off so much.
Yeah.
They quit putting it on there.
Yeah. Well, those low level things, sometimes we'd have to go so low, and a lot of that old grass down there is that wild, high growing type. You'd have it in your propeller, you know. That's how low you'd be flying.
I know I got the dicker skid out of me one morning. The crew of B-25, a whole squadron of 2, came over one morning. We hadn't even got out of, we were sleeping on the ground out there in La Senia. I never will forget it in Algeria. Anyway, there's a whole squadron of B-25s. I guess they were practicing on a raid somewhere. They came over low over our tents, and I like to jumped out of my skin. They right above the ground, and they just shook the ground we was on. About seemed like 50 of them just vroom right through there, you know. Just scared the life out of us. We didn't know what in the world was happening, but they were gone before we even knew what happened.
Yeah.
But it was kind of great with flying. They called them the earthquakers, and they all had the same insignia on them. You know, I never will forget those things.
You were glad they were friendly anyway.
Yeah, that was the main thing. But they were low level, and they had practiced in a raid somewhere, I don't know what, but I thought there's enemy planes when they came over. That's what scared me so bad, I think. Just right on the ground.
I know
The
one
radar
time
couldn't pick them up, I
you
guess.
sent me some little belt pieces of leather that pocket. I still got one. But anyway, that's when you were in Morocco.
Yeah, they made, that was one of their products in Morocco is leather. That's one of the main industries there.
Well, they go on with joy, baby.
Huh?
Videos of.
Oh, it's okay. Okay.
Excuse me for breaking in.
This is direct over here, I guess.
Yeah.
That makes it interesting.
One other thing, when I was flying out of Bengay and Gulf, I told you my flying training there on Myrtle Beach and so forth helped me out. I was assigned because of that training to flights up to Taiwan. And my job and this other plane that would, 2 of us would leave. And we'd fly over alcohol plants up there.
That's Formosa, used to
Yeah,
be.
well, it's the same thing.
Taiwan now.
Yeah, Formosa. And we'd find these alcohol plants, or they'd already know about them, but they'd say they're so-and-so, and we'd get to the plant, and he'd go on one side of the smokestack, and I'd go on the other side, you know, and drop a bomb right into the side of the plant, because that's what we knew how to do, you know.
Yeah.
And so we always turn our camera on, and you'd see that plant going up, you know, we'd bring it back every time, show the plant gone. And we first dropped, they put 2 500-pound bombs in there. And we told them, it says, that's not working. You drop your 500-pound, your main one, to hit it. And then time you can mash it the second time, it's hitting over the other side of the buildings. So we told them just put 1,000-pound bomb, and that's what we dropped after that. And 1,000 pound on each side of a building, just about demolished.
Take it out.
Yeah, and you could just see it going up. But
Just
that's
like the little woman down.
well, that's on one of these missions I was telling them about. We were coming into this alcohol plant, and I just started my run. And they must have been changing shifts along about that time, and there was a little group of about, say, 50 people, I guess, sitting there waiting for a ferry to come across this big river. And I saw this little lady there, she saw us coming, you know, and she dropped down on her knees like that, and I says, gosh, they must be Christians or something. And I lit up on my bomb, you know, that 14 machine guns I was telling you about. I didn't shoot. And I said, well, I saved their life. That's the way I felt.
She might have said bless you, she might have blessed you.
By her kneeling like she was praying,
Yeah.
I saved their life. Well, that's about all I know about that.
You hadn't told about your number of missions that you flew.
Well, I flew 52 altogether, and I didn't.
You haven't told about your medals.
I can't remember all the medals. I do remember a Purple Heart, and I had a place on my finger that was a piece of flak hit when. Now this is a 20 millimeter, what I was talking about. I think came up through the plane and it hit that one of those 14 caliber machine guns where the shells were right by me there, and a piece of it hit my finger. Right, you can see that white right there. Walt, and it just kind of ripped it all about half in two, and had to sew that back up. And they gave me a Purple Heart for it, because I guess it's hurt in
Why not?
combat.
It could have been, you could have been over your heart or something.
Coach, it could have hit you in the
But
face.
the fella right that was sitting in the top turret gunner, you know, he had it all in his butt, you know, where they just hit him in the bottom, you know, and they picked him out of him a long time.
Oh, my.
But I had a big old steel plate behind me, but it came beside the steel plate and hit me in the finger. But I guess that's about the biggest. And after I finished my 52 missions, I came back to. Let me see. Came back to Atlanta first.
You came back by air or ship?
No, I came back by ship. One of those old
Troop transport?
troop transports that about 5 deep. You'd be sleeping, you know, and it's rough.
Yes,
And I was
yes,
down below the staterooms, and we stopped in Leyte and picked up litter cases that were rotting all over, you know, and still alive, and put them in those staterooms. And we had to walk through that air there to get to the dining hall, and sometimes I couldn't hardly eat. It smelled so bad trying to get up to the eating place. But I know a lot of them didn't make it back because they were in too bad a shape. But that was how they hauled them back anyway on this same ship. But it took us a long while to get back, and we stopped and went through the Panama Canal on the way back. I remember that, and got lifted, you know, and it seemed like it was about 20 feet. We were raised as we went through the canal.
And you came back into where?
Well, let me see. You know, I believe it's at Norfolk where we,
Norfolk?
I believe. And then we came home, and I went to Atlanta first, and they were
We went to Donaldson Air Force Base at Greenville too. That's
well,
way
that
back.
was the last place I went.
Discharge.
Yeah, but they were so full at Atlanta, they just couldn't even touch us there, and so I came home and stayed about a month, and then I went up to Greensboro to be discharged there.
Greenville.
Greensboro,
Greenville.
Greensboro, North Carolina.
Well, that's not Donaldson. Donaldson's at Greenville. Now,
You
they
said
got
you were where
they got
Gray
one at
Burch
Goldsboro.
was.
They got one at
Yeah.
Goldsboro, but I don't know whether
I
that,
think it's
I
at
thought you always
Greensboro.
told me you were discharged at
Not-
Greenville.
Not Greensboro,
Oh,
cause that's where it was, I know.
oh, okay.
And, I stayed there a long time before they could even get to me there, because they give you tests there. And a lot of people claim they want pensions and all that kind of stuff, and they have to be pretty well checked out before they'll give them anything, you know. And so finally, I got discharged there, and, that was about it.
Uh-huh. Well, I remember when you and Eileen came home, right after you got back, I guess, while you were on leave probably. If I'd have met you on the street, I don't
You
believe
wouldn't
I
know
would have
me.
known you.
I'd lost a lot of weight.
Your eyes were sunk back like in your head.
Real thin, I remember
You were
that.
thin,
Yeah,
and you had black, real dark rings around your eyes, your skin.
Yeah.
Probably
You
hadn't had
never
a
did
good
get
diet.
sick though, did you? Get down and sick?
But that old gentleman I was telling you about, a lot of responsible for some of that. He
Yeah.
didn't care whether they cooked good meals or not, and you couldn't hardly eat that crap they were putting out.
Yeah.
And he was gone 4 years. You see, he had 4 years of service.
But,
A
when
lot
you
can
got
happen in that
You
area
know,
of the
it's-
world in 4 years' time, just living there.
That's
back,
right.
your stomach shrinks too, you
Oh,
know,
yeah.
when you don't
Oh,
eat.
yeah.
And I was gonna eat a great big old steak when I got back, and I couldn't eat half of it. That's how little I'd been eating, you know.
Mhm.
But, I guess that's about all. Walt, now you.
You know, I tell you about mine,
You
nothing.
do yours,
I can't keep up with it like Gray does. I guess I might as well start off by saying how old I am now. I was born December 6, 1915, and born in Woolsey behind the old where Weldon Stubbs lives now.
Behind the
Used to
post
live.
office there.
Back of the post office out there. That was where I was born. And I remember old Chet said, boy, I know when you was born. Said, your mama came in and says, we were moving that day, and said, your mama says, Chet, I'm so tired. Will you make my bed for me? So Chet made the bed for her and says, next morning you was here. He would tell about that, you know, when I was born. Of course, we grew up around Woolsey there. I'll start off with I guess I might as well start about the Army career. I remember I was drafted from Henry County rather than Fayette, and so they took a group of us to Camp Wheeler in Macon, and had an examinations and things like that. And then I was assigned to Maryland, to Aberdeen, Maryland. That's where I had basic training.
I remember that.
Company B, the 3rd Battalion. I never will forget that. And so I stayed there 13 weeks. Then they shipped me to Savannah, Georgia. And Hunter Field was down there, the Air Force base. And so I said, I believe I want to get in that, go towards the Air Force as much as I can. I was in ordnance there at Aberdeen, Maryland. And I remember though, when we got to Aberdeen, I never will forget that. It's a proving ground there. And all night long, they were testing all kind of bombs and ammunition out there at Aberdeen. That was the only testing site in the United States, I guess. But anyway, those big shells and things would just rock our barracks, you know. And I couldn't sleep for several nights there, for those shells busting all night long, you know, it never ceased. And testing ammunition and stuff. But after I finished Aberdeen, they, like I say, they sent me to Savannah, Georgia, and I remember we built a rifle range that had been built in the First World War II. And they said, well, we got to get you boys in shape because you're fixing to go overseas. And it was hot, and it was in a hot summertime at Savannah. But anyway, we went out to clean up the rifle range, and we had axes and things like that, and hot, you wouldn't believe it. So I remember the main thing I remember about cleaning up that rifle range was one of the boys found a big rattlesnake on the rifle range there that we cleared up, you know. That was the only thing I remembered about that. But anyway, after Savannah, they sent me to Harding Field, I believe in Louisiana, in order to get ready to go. And then we were assigned to a squadron there, I think. So I stayed in Harding Field. It was a staging area, I guess, there. And so we had some pilots still training there at Harding Field in Louisiana, in Baton Rouge. And I remember I went to a football game while I was down there. That's the only time in the Army I had any recreation. The one time I remember football game, LSU was playing somebody, and of course it's full of soldiers down there then, and I enjoyed that football game. That's the only thing I can remember about Harding Field in Baton Rouge. But anyway, they sent us from Baton Rouge to Camp Kilmer in Alabama, and that's where we got on the ship. I remember one morning early, they had a passenger train to pull into the Camp Kilmer, wherever it was, and load us up and took us on that passenger train to Staten Island. And it's during the night, and I remember when we got off the train, I thought we was just on they said it was on a ferry, but I just thought it was another island or something, you know. You couldn't tell anything at night much. Of course, there's lights, but you couldn't tell where you were. You didn't see the water or anything. Anyway, we loaded on there, and sometime during the night, the ship pulled out. It was a USS Uruguay, I believe it was, Uruguay. And it was a cruise ship at one time. Oh, it was fabulous, but had all the windows covered up with plywood. The murals and things on the wall were just covered all over the ship with plywood, where it wouldn't destroy all that, you know. But anyway, that's what we went across on as a Uruguay. And I think we were out about 18 days, and we pulled into Casablanca. And at that time, the French couldn't make up their minds whether they wanted to side with the Americans or the Germans. So they said it wasn't safe for us to go in there at the time, so we pulled back out. We'd gotten almost into port as well as I can remember. But anyway, we had to pull back out into the Atlantic for a few days, and then they decided, well, we can go in now. But when we got into the port there, the French had scuttled their biggest battleship, the Jean Mart. I remember the name of it, the Jean Mart. It was a big battle wagon, and they had scuttled it in the harbor. You couldn't get up to the docks anything, hardly. And that they just disrupted the whole harbor there, the French did. But somehow or other, we got off the boat. I guess we got to a temporary dock somewhere and unloaded and went on up to the airport in Casablanca. And we stayed there for several days. I reckon our planes came in about that time. P-39s, Air Cobras, I remember that very well. But there's only a few. We might have had some P-40s, fighter planes. But anyway, they were flying some too. Our pilots were flying a little bit as a shore patrol, more or less, flying around the edge of the North Africa there. Mm-hmm. But anyway, like Gray was talking about those mats, it was during the rainy season. We were bivouacked in a big old hangar that had been shot up and all that, but we stayed in there anyway, there at the airfield in Casablanca. But anyway, they had those steel mats out there, and when the pilots would come back in, if they didn't, I don't know, they may have just made rough landed or something in the water. It was raining every day. And they'd hit those mats and just knock dents in them all the way. And I'd see them take off and land in boat, and I'd see how the landing gear would stand all those bumps, you know, when they'd come in. But they wasn't afraid of them. They'd come right on in, and I never did see one of the things tear up. But anyway, after we stayed there a few weeks, I remember the first few weeks we were in Casablanca, the Germans made a raid on the port right there. We were only a short way from the seaport there in Casablanca where the ships were unloading. And I could see them. Back then they didn't have much radar. They couldn't pick them up. They just had spotlights. Those big old searchlights, you know, I can see them even today, flashing up in the sky, and they'd pick out a German plane, and then they'd start to see the traces going up at them, you know, and as you think you hear a thunderstorm, it wasn't nothing. When the Navy started shooting and all the anti-aircraft batteries they had sitting around the harbor there, it was just bam, 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 just roars continuously as long as that. But anyway, they'd get one with the searchlights, and then you'd see them traces start shooting. They was trying to lay pattern for them where they'd fly into it, but they never did shoot one down, as I remember. But they'd pick out 2 or 3 of them, you know. You could see the old Germans insignias on them, you know, and everything at night. But anyway, That's like scared me to death. I remember that first raid they had there, and there's a bomb hit. They tried to hit the airport where we were, and there's a bomb hit us about as far as, well, about, I'd say 100 feet from where I was laying, and it blew mud all over me, you know. Well, the bombs hit out there that close to me, you know, and they like to scare the life out of me. I said, oh Lord, they'll get me before I ever get out more, you know. But anyway, got through that all right. And then after we stayed a few weeks there at Casablanca, we went up to Oran. It's another, we stayed around the northern edge of the Mediterranean all the way around North Africa there, except one time we were in right close to the Sahara Desert, a little old place they called Oujda. It was on the edge of the Sahara Desert there. I remember that it looked like 10,000 acres, it's as flat as this table. And they had a lot of vineyards out there. The French it was a colonial possession at that time. All of North Africa was French colonial. And they controlled the whole government and everything. Of course, it's not that way now. The Arabs run it now. But anyway, we went Oran. We stayed there a few weeks, and then we moved to Constantine, and let me see, there's 2 or 3 other places. Bone, there's a place named Bone. They don't even use that name anymore on the coast of North Africa. And then Bizerta is a seaport where we left to go over to Sardinia, I believe. When we got on an LST there at Bizerta and went over to Cagliari, I believe they call it, C-A-G-L-A-R-I. You don't pronounce a G in Italian. They call it Cagliari. We landed there and unloaded all our bombing equipment, stuff like that. This was more or less temporary for the ordnance crew, because we had to go and set up, it was a makeshift thing when we went, part of us went to Sardinia, I believe, and set up air revetments and things for our bombs. So I had to look after a lot of that myself, you know. I mean, we'd unload some of the ships and take our own truck
to the ammunition
and
dump.
take it out there and put it around the hills and all that. Oh, but there's one thing I forgot to tell you about, and I skipped over that to begin with. When we were in Casablanca, they had unloaded thousands and thousands of 50-gallon gasoline tanks out from Casablanca. They on the side of those hills. I never will forget those old hills. There wasn't any trees or anything much on them. But anyway, they just had thousands of gasoline cans out there with aviation fluid. And there was a big villa up on the hill up there, huge place up there. So just a few days, I noticed they wouldn't let any of us go up that way. They said, what's the matter? I don't know, but we don't have any business up there. They had all kind of security around there. And it lasted for about a week, I reckon. And I came to find out later, after we had gotten away from Casablanca there, that President Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin had met there, you know. I knew something was going on, but we didn't know what it was, you know. But that's why they had the conference, you know. And I know y'all saw that in the paper, all that. But that, huh?
Potsdam?
Yeah, no, it might have been Potsdam. I guess that's what they called it. No,
That was later, I believe.
This wasn't Potsdam. It was something else.
Well, you were making history.
Anyway, they had the officials all, you know, United States, had Roosevelt and Stalin and Churchill, yeah.
Yeah, I think I've seen some video of that.
Yeah, well, anyway, I saw all that going on, but I didn't know what it was, you know. But after that, we left Casablanca. But I'll get back to when we got over to Sardinia. It's a pretty island, by the way, and it's only about, I guess, 80 miles to Italy, and Elba is between Sardinia, Elba is, and that's where the Germans were on Elba at the time we were over there on Sardinia. And they could hear us when we were cranking up over there, even, you know. And that's where Napoleon was part of the time on Elba, I think. But anyway, we went from Sardinia up to Corsica. And I remember as we came into Corsica, the LST that was bringing us in there we could look up on it was kind of mountainous country, and we could look up in, I saw a thing that looked like a castle up there. And I said, boy, that sure is a pretty place up there. So that's where we bivouacked up there, my small outfit there. Our planes weren't there at Corsica yet. But anyway, some of them weren't, you know. We'd get new planes every through years. We'd get P-47s, P-51s, and that kind of ships later on, you know, at different times down our route all the way up through North Africa. But anyway, let me see, what was I telling about Corsica? Oh, it was an old French prison where we bivouacked up there. And I had read years, Napoleon was born there on Corsica. That was his home. In fact, I went in his house where he's supposed to have been born there, Napoleon. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they used to call Napoleon a little Corsican. That was one of the names they named him, you know. But anyway, we stayed on Corsica for a year or two, I guess. And we had a bunch of planes to come in there one time, gliders. When they got ready for the invasion of southern France, they brought in a bunch of plastic, let's see, fiberglass, no, it wasn't fiberglass, plywood gliders that hold about 25 or 30 men. And just hundreds of those things they brought in there, just around the edge of the field out there. So one morning real early, we knew they were going to invade southern France. This was before the Normandy invasion, I reckon. It might have been after the Normandy invasion. Anyway, they were going to hit southern France from the south side, and they came in from England on the other side. Well, they pulled those gliders out one morning. I noticed a bunch of, what is those trains what are those planes they used to haul so much stuff with?
Liberator, B-24s.
No, I'm talking about
C-47?
C-47s.
Oh, yeah.
It was just full of them, you know. We had just hundreds of them out there one morning. And they were the ones that pulled off those gliders early one morning before daylight. They just pulled them out. And I understand they just turned them off, pulled them over to southern France and unhooked, and they went down and just left them where they went down, you know, in France. I guess it probably landed in the daytime there, but they pulled all those gliders out one night, you know, just hundreds of them from Corsica. And let me see what else I remember about Corsica. I remember the water was very soft there, because it had been so much time that we couldn't get a decent bath, and we put us up a thing on the side of the mountain there, and a big 50-gallon can and pipes of water into that thing, and then we put a sprinkler down under the can, you know, and the water was so soft you could just lather all over, and it's just the best baths. I never forget that as long as I was in the army. Those nice baths you could get there on Corsica. And let's see, something else about, both of them are right historic islands. I remember King Victor Emmanuel's photographer had left Italy and came over to Sardinia, and a lot of the boys had him to make photographs of him, you know. King Victor Emmanuel's photographer, he was doing all that, and I don't know if the boys went over there and had the pictures made, you know. He'd make them for them, but he was a good photographer. And
now, what about the prison? You said that there was an old prison there. Was it?
Oh, that prison, yeah. Yeah, I would go up in that thing. It's right funny. There was an old couple that lived in there. I guess they must have been natives for centuries there or something. But anyway, it might have been. I remember there one or two of those men were. What do you call these? Got kind of pink eyes and things.
Albinos?
Albinos. One of those men. That's the first time I'd ever seen an albino man. And there's his brother. And they had a bunch of goats there. And I had to had stored ammunition bombs up on the mountain up there close to where we were bivouacked. And he'd bring his goats in there grazing every morning, you know. One of those old men, one of those albino families. But he took a liking to me, and I could speak a little French, and it just tickled him to death, you know, and I'd tell him about different things, you know, and so he invited me up one night to come up in that prison where they lived there. He and his mother, and she was an old lady. I'll never forget it. I was so nervous going up there. I couldn't stay up there. They told us not to fraternize with those people much anyway. But anyway, he was just being friendly, because he liked me for some reason or other, and I talked to him every day when he'd bring his goats, and he'd try to share his meal with me when I was out at the bomb dump out there. He'd have some cheese there, and I saw skippers all over his cheese, and I said, no thank you, don't believe a woman. He made his own cheese, they did, you know. But I couldn't eat his cheese, I never will get that.
You have to be
They
sorry.
tell me the best cheese.
That cooked me right then, I said, no thank you, I wouldn't eat his cheese.
Did you run across that hard cheese? You know, Patsy Blackstock, a girl lives here. She brought some back, and you could just peel it with a knife and it'd crack off. You know, it dried so hard.
Yeah.
And they said that's the best cheese they have
Yeah.
over there. That
I imagine it's all right, but I couldn't stand them skippers on there. I couldn't eat it. But anyway, I got a kick out of that. But anyway, I didn't stay but a few minutes up there that night. He came, and some of the boys in camp says, Walt, there's an old Frenchman out there who wants to see you. And so I went out and talked to him, and he wanted me to come down into the house. But I went up into prison anyway. There's different levels of the thing, and you wouldn't believe how those the French used to send all their incorrigibles down there to Corsica, because they couldn't handle them up there in France, I reckon, to this prison. And they had put terraces around and different tiers on the mountain up there, stones, and that's where our bombs were up on those different tiers, you know. And that's where that man's goats always grazed up there. But anyway, up in that old prison there was, I guess, those cells were about 6 feet wide, about 4 feet high, with a little window in it about a foot square, and it was about 10 feet deep maybe. And just hundreds of them down those corridors, you know, just like animals in there. And I'd open some of those doors there, and there's, of course, French writing all over it. And I remember some of the French writing is in there. Probably some of it was filthy and some of it wasn't. But anyway, it'd say, freedom is sweet and all that kind of stuff, you know, in French. All inside written on in those cells there. But it must have been 1,000 or so of those little cells in the different floors in
now,
that
what
prison.
war was this that they were in there from, or just to live in the?
France just used that as a prison.
Yeah,
That's a prison.
yeah. This was just
Like
there.
England used to send them to Australia.
Yeah, that's right. That's what it was.
France
That's what I
would
meant. by it.
exile them down to Corsica,
Yeah,
probably,
that's right.
just to get rid of.
Yeah.
That might be a good idea for us
I was thinking
in
about
this
that a lot
country.
of time.
I
Yeah.
believe
Not one of them over in Africa. I mean,
I believe if I had to live in
That'd be
there.
good.
Then after Corsica, I'll say we went on over to let's see, Sicily for a short time. Some of the engine boys, some of the crew chiefs went over there to service a plane till we could get over to Italy, and they stayed over there maybe a month. Some of the boys did. I didn't go over to Sicily, but anyway, we started in there at Naples. Napoli is the name of it in Italian. Napoli, that's the way it's pronounced today. Anyway, that's where we landed in Italy, on the hill down there, and I remember this. It was torn all to pieces, and we had bombed it, and I guess the Germans had too. We bivouacked in an old automobile assembly plant there or something. Well, it was torn all to pieces, and all the cemetery was shot up even over there, around Naples. And we stayed there a short time, and then we went up to Ghisonacci, I believe they call it. And we doing pretty heavy operating up through there. We were, after the Germans put a sharp up in there. Our pilots would strafe the roads and hit the bridges and things, and we carried on the latter planes we had, we'd put 1,000-pound bomb on under each wing, each side of the wing. Of course, these were fighter plane, one engine, and they take them 1,000-pounders on this without a bit of trouble. And then if they didn't see a target, I don't know, intelligence would brief them on what they hit sometime. If they didn't see it, they would bring them back. And I remember a lot of times they'd come back in, and the bomb shackles wouldn't hold them. They were so heavy when they hit the runway, if it was pretty rough, they'd shake out the bombs and they'd go bloop, 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 rolling down the runways. And we had, I know we've had some black troops on the end. Man, you ought to see them scouts flying away from there, getting away from there. Them bombs bumping down there toward them, you know. Of course,
They didn't go off when they hit that.
they won't go off unless we jump on our bomb truck, run down and bring them up on our benches and take them back and put them back on next time. You know they got fuses. You got a fuse in the back of them and one in the nose of them, and they got little windmills on them. And when the pilot gets ready to release them, he'll pull some kind of trigger or something to hold the arming wires in them. It's got an arming wire that goes in the front to the back. All right, when he lets those bombs off, those arming wires come out and the windmills start turning.
Yeah.
But the back one is just caused by inertia. Whenever it hits anything, it just goes off. But the front one, the windmill's got to come off and it'll just leave exposed fuse there. But that's the way the bombs do. Oh, I was telling you about some of my training too. I'm just at random about what I did. But they sent me from Savannah, Georgia. They sent me to Savannah, Illinois, to an aviation ordnance school up there. And that's where I learned ordnance. Learned I saw them making bombs. You know, when they pour those bombs, they had the cases already come in there, those steel cases. And it looks like syrup they're pouring down there. That's TNT.
Oh, really?
Yes, just a liquid they pour in there and it hardens when it cools, you know. And I went through that thing, and of course they teach us about all the fuses and things, and I had to learn all the different ingredients that go into the fuses and all that kind of stuff. And powder, I had to learn all that about rosette, certain little holes in the powder. There's 7 different kinds of stuff about the powder. Train,
Did you
know.
really help make the bombs?
No, we didn't help make them. We just watched them make them up there.
If you're gonna be
We'd have
fooling
school
with them,
there,
you
though.
have to know how they were made.
We had to take notes and that thing on everything. But that was part of my training too. But after that, I was ready to go overseas, and that's when I went over there. And let's see. After Italy, I came back. I came home.
How'd you come home?
I came home on the USS America. It was a passenger ship one time, USS America. And I came around. Well, the way I came home, I wasn't supposed to stay at home. I was supposed to go back to Italy because the war was still going on with Germany. But anyway, when I came home, the war ended with Germany. But what I was thinking to say, I loaded there on this ship, and they went around to Toronto from Naples. That's where I loaded on the ship. Went around from Naples back around to Toronto, around the boot down there, and picked up the rest of the crew, passengers there. Most of them were crippled or something, you know, coming home. Anyway, I was coming home on a temporary duty, TD they called it. And I was supposed to go back in 27 days, I believe, come back to Italy. But the war ended with Germany, and
I remember while you were home.
And I had enough points to get out. I'd been overseas so long. They said, you can get out if you want to. And I said, well, let me out. So I went to Fort McPherson, and they said, well, yeah, you can get out here, but it says, if you go to Camp Shelby in Mississippi, you can get a discharge the next day. So they loaded me on a bus, and I went to Camp Shelby, and the next day I got my discharge and came back.
That's interesting, Walt.
So that one.
It's covered up out here at our base all the time.
Yeah.
You mean some bases like Fort McPherson was so much busier?
I guess it was, because they told me, they said, we just can't handle it right now. Said it'll be a week or so before you can ever get a discharge. And they said, if you ride over to Fort Shelby, said it won't cost you anything. We put you on the bus and take. I said, I'll go. So I got on the bus and we went to Camp Shelby, and they gave me a discharge. That's the day I got there. I reckon the day after, and I was back home.
This was 1945?
45.
Well, those are interesting accounts.
Well,
Gray, you got out in
mine wasn't.
46.
Mine wasn't as eventful as Gray's, though.
You know, and
But I'd say both of you had a right,
Hey, how you doing?
saw a lot of the world.
I got, I've given my brother up from where he lived down in Jonesboro. He wanted me to talk on his machine here and tell him all my war history. He's getting all his brothers together. Yeah.
And they don't.
Now, Gray, you didn't tell them you didn't have any story, but about your little monkey you enjoyed so
No,
much
it
over
ain't.
there.
That's not.
Well, that's kind of cute.
That's an extra, that's,
Well, tell us about it, Gray.
Well, this monkey came from Zamboanga, but one of my buddies brought it back, and he says they say that if you keep a monkey, says you'll get killed, and the Filipinos just wouldn't have it, you know, that way. And so I said, well, I'll take it, and I tied him to a bedpost I had there. I'd lay my cigarettes out, and I'd be gone an hour and come back, and every cigarette I had, he'd tear the thing open and throw it out. Just take them one at a time. I couldn't keep cigarettes to save my life. And different things like that. And so finally, when I left, I gave them to somebody there that thought they was getting a bug. But he was Jocko. That was Jocko.
You rode with
Jocko.
him in the plane and everything.
Yeah.
we can
You
appreciate
took
that.
him on a mission?
Yeah, I took him with me one
You
day.
did?
Yeah.
You should have made him bombardier or something.
But he didn't get much to eat out of me. We had to carry old K ration,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
with us.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
We
Seeing
can
for himself, huh?
we can appreciate the monkey story because we've had one too, and we know how they can tear things up. And I was in a cage in the utility room, sitting on the dryer, and he could reach through the cage, and he pulled the cord out of the wall and chewed it in two. You know, chewed the cord in two.
Yeah.
That was one thing. And another thing he did one time was he got loose from his leash, and he climbed the trees and was going across the high power wires across the street, and that dangling chain, you know,
Good
part of his
Lord.
leash had a chain on it, metal,
yeah.
and he caused the the power short out, and it got out neighbors'
Burn his chain in
TV.
two.
Mhm.
Got
Really?
neighbors to,
Did he live through it?
Yeah.
yeah.
I didn't tell
hurt
you
him.
something else I want to tell you about. When I was after I left Marta, I went to Bayek Island, and that's just off the coast, and I believe it was New Guinea is where I was. After I left Nadzab, I went to Bayek Island, and stationed there, we were still in the process of cleaning up jobs, and they'd go back into these holes in the side of this little Bayek Island, and they were taking flamethrowers and go in the front of the caves and just blow it with flames and kill them back in there that way, because they wouldn't come out any other way. And
We seen.
anyway, one day I decided I'd get on. You was talking about LSTs.
Yeah.
There's a little island called Iowa Island, not very far away, and I got on that thing and went across. And you know how soldiers are; they were hunting something to do to kill the time. And when I got ready to get on this little LST coming back, there was about 5 or 6 in a little group of pygmies with the bones in the nose and just wild as I thought. I didn't know what to think, really. But the leader had the most beautiful ebony cane I ever saw in my life. It was about 3 feet taller than he was, but he walked along with that thing, and I was sitting there figuring, how could I trade him out of that? I never saw a cane that pretty in my life. And but anyway, I let him go. But they didn't ask to get on. They just hopped in there ahead of us. You know, they don't pay the way or anything. They'd done it before, I could tell.
Yeah.
And they went over to Bayek Island, and then they hopped off, and they was gone into the bushes. But there's some wild people over around New
Yeah.
Guinea.
Yeah, you know, I read somewhere just about, I guess when World War II started, they still have some cannibals on some of those islands.
I bet
Yeah.
that crowd could eat you up.
Yeah. I read that somewhere.
Well,
And
since the
just-
war, you know, they have discovered some new tribes over there that
Yeah.
Yeah.
weren't known before.
Well, that's a wild
Never had any
place I ever
contact
saw.
with
Yeah.
the civilized world.
Right.
That New Guinea is a wild island.
Yeah.
And just not too many years back, there was a Japanese, they'd been living for, 40-something years, almost
In the
50 years
Philippines.
over there by himself in
Yeah,
someplace,
yeah.
didn't know anything about anything,
Yeah,
that the war
yeah.
was over, that Japan lost or
They didn't
anything.
even care whether the war was there or not, most of them.
Yeah.
if it didn't bother them.
Well, now, the
But-
Japanese didn't have flamethrowers, did they? Do they possess those?
I don't think so,
I hope not.
but we were the ones that getting them out of the island there where
Now, I've
we'd be
seen
safe
lots of
and
movies where they've used,
moving
you know,
around.
war movies where they use those flamethrowers and it gets
But they
every,
said one of them got in line, he must have lost his mind. And they said they shot him in line, one of our chow lines. That was on Back Island. You know, just hunting, he's starving to death.
You just come out looking for something to eat.
Yeah. One other thing I'll tell you about, one day on a mission in the China Sea, we went up nearly as far as Shanghai and coming down the coast there, we were up pretty high in the clouds. Now, I happened to be looking down and I saw a aircraft carrier right under me. And when we got back to where we were stationed, the lead ship had been hit with flak from a bomb, you know, up in the air. And I began to tell him, I said, well, I know where he got it. I said, I was looking down and saw an aircraft carrier, and they took my information. They said they'd been trying for days to locate that. It was the Japanese Navy trying to get back towards Tokyo, and they were headed up in that direction. And it'd been raining bad, and they lost them. And so I helped them out that day.
well, you did a lot of,
Now, just looking down.
yeah.
Oh, there's one thing I remember distinctly though. Sometimes, like Gray said, sometimes the soldiers would want to find something to do, you know, and so they were wanting volunteers to drive a truck up to from one base to another, way off somewhere. And I said, yeah, I'll drive it up there. So by myself. So I started out that night, and about midnight or sometimes I got kind of tired, and I was looking for a place. I knew they had places along the highway there that you could stay overnight if you wanted to. But anyway, I pulled in this place, and one of those old round, you've seen them, I know, all over North Africa there, those old round buildings, you know. I don't know whether they're shrines or what they were, but it's one side of the road, and there was a sergeant out there. There's several of them out there, those houses, and where you could stop and get rest. So I said, I need some rest. I said, well, you got a place I can stay around here a minute, get till I get a few hours sleep. He said, yes, there's going that place right over there. So one of those old round buildings about a 30-foot diameter, I reckon, and just round. So I went in there, and I looked. You couldn't hardly see. There wasn't any lights in there, but you could see enough to. I don't know how I saw him, but his old Arab sitting in there, in his old long gown, you know. So I didn't say anything. I don't know why I didn't raise a fuss about it, but I said, well, if he can stand it, I guess I can. But I didn't sleep a wink there. I kept one eye on that rascal all night long. He was sitting there, just me and him, in that old hut there, you know. And I couldn't sleep for worried about, well, he might cut my throat or something, you know. They were bad about that. But I remember that that's one night I didn't get any rest. But after that, I took on off, went on in where I was going. But I sure was nervous that night. It's funny you can remember things like that so well. I could just see old Al squatting down over there in the corner, you know, never opened his mouth at all. In his old long